Welcome to the Hey Chaplain podcast. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. This podcast is for cops and for everyone interested in law enforcement culture, careers, and wellness. On Hey Chaplain, you'll hear from dispatchers and federal agents, sheriffs, and U.S. Marshals, as well as the occasional local patrol officer. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain share their own wisdom so that police officers everywhere can survive and thrive. This is the second part of my interview with Jon Asher, who worked for 8 years on the U.S. Marshal's Fugitive Apprehension Task Force. He talks about how you can help your department while working full-time at a task force, and this is an interesting dynamic where, as a task force officer, you're balancing relationships among people at the municipal, county, state, and federal levels. He also does a great job of weighing the pros and cons of this type of work. Don't miss what he says about coming back and reintegrating with your department once the task force assignment is over. And you'll want to hear what he thinks some of the advantages are to having done task force work. Here's Jon Asher. Now, I understand part-time, you're on loan, you're working extra hours with this task force. But going full-time, that's kind of like leaving your agency. What does that feel like?
Yeah, it's a weird position to be in. It was an adjustment. Mm-hmm. I wasn't a detective before, but I'm showing up at this office and everybody's got desks and cubicles, and I'm almost antsy. Like, when do we get started? What do we got to do to get out of here?
Right,
you know,
right.
There was one of the old veteran guys that just kind of like, hey, we're going to get there. Slow down.
Yeah.
You know, it was refreshing in a sense. I wasn't tied to a radio number, to a district, like when you work patrol, even when I work SWAT, you know, you have to sign in every day. You have to be on that computer. You have to be here, 100% accountability. There was kind of a freedom in a sense.
Yeah.
But at the same time, the mission was clear cut. Like, we had our objective outlined for us. So here's what we want to accomplish. And we were given the freedom to decide how we wanted to do that. Not being micromanaged and things like that really actually kind of motivated us. And it motivated us. We had team leaders we were responsible to that kind of oversaw the task force. But we were a group of officers from various agencies, local guys, state guys, and then the federal deputies with us. And we each brought our own caseload, and we had the freedom to kind of decide and rank, like, what are we going to work on today? Whose takes priority? Right. What time are we going to start? Do we need to be out there early? Do we need to be out there late?
Is your agency feeding this to you? Is saying, hey, here's things we'd like you to bring to the task force?
Yes and no.
Okay.
A lot of it boiled down to personal relationships you had built.
Okay.
I'm a city officer. When we investigate a case, when it goes to get charged, it goes through the county. So then the county issues a warrant for that person's arrest. Well, the county kind of holds ownership of that warrant. So we had to play nice. I had to build relationships with them to know that, hey, I'm not gonna mess this up. That they would actually reach out to me and say, hey, a warrant just came out for such and such. Would you like to work this case? So that was one aspect. I would get warrants from the county sent to me, especially if they knew that this fugitive wasn't going to be in our local jurisdiction. Like, maybe they had crossed state lines. We're in a different city. We're living or supposed to be staying somewhere up here in Kansas City, Kansas, where our task force was located. So I would get those assigned to me from the county. I would have detectives that would reach out to me and say, hey, I worked this investigation. It's getting ready to be submitted to a warrant. And these guys are trusting you with their case file, front to back. Yeah. They've done all this work into getting this person charged, and this is kind of the final piece of the puzzle. Yeah. And so they're trusting you with a lot of responsibility.
If the county gives these warrants, you sends them your direction, and these detectives are asking you for help, and you don't get the task force to give them some attention, what would be the consequence? I mean, would that ultimately get you pulled from a task force?
It could, for sure. You could get some pushback like, well, what is it that you're working on that's so important? Because this is the most important thing we have right now. We
keep making requests, and we want the task force to come help.
So there could be some pushback from your agency, and kind of demand like some accountability as far as what are you working on then instead.
Okay, so being successful on the task force is in part knowing how to keep the folks back home happy with the amount of attention they're getting from the task force.
Absolutely.
And so building those relationships, managing those requests versus everybody else's requests too,
Sure.
is part of what you're doing.
Yeah.
You negotiate that amongst yourselves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes there was no real rhyme or reason to it. We'd send, 2 or 3 people to sit on one, maybe 2 or 3 people to work on another one. And it was just kind of like whoever sees their person first, that's where we were going.
How much of that work is just opportunistic versus can you give enough attention to make an arrest happen? Or do you need to be a little bit lucky too?
Each investigation is almost case-by-case basis.
Sure,
it's individual. And you have a little bit of control over how you want to steer or direct your fugitive investigation. Sometimes it's just old school, hey, we're going to knock and talk. Mm-hmm. We're going to try to do some interviews to develop some information ourselves. A lot of times you may not want the person to know that they're being sought, There may be times where we just do old school surveillance, and it's sitting there hours on end, hoping to get lucky, hoping to see this person. We have to be able to weigh, is this their residence? Is it not their residence? Are we going to be able to force entry? Do we have to get a warrant? Are we able to get cooperation?
And is all of this a good use of your resources and time when you have other fugitives you're looking for?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Some cases we may rely on, not to give away like tricks of the trade, but we wrote a ton of search warrants for, the sky was the limit as far as just bits and pieces of information that we could mine from to try to develop locations, because sometimes we had no idea. We had no idea where to start, to be honest with you. But yeah, sometimes we would get lucky. Sometimes things go perfectly. Sometimes things don't go well. It was definitely a learning experience for each of us. And I think I saw the maturation of our task force the longer I was up there, to where early in my career, we saw our guy, we may have jumped out on him. We went from that to, I think, more professional, like, hey, here's what we know. We can walk away. The person will come back. Mm-hmm. There's a safer way to do this.
With the task forces, do they provide any kind of training or other opportunities for you?
Yeah, so I'd have to train with them as well. They have particular deputies that are pretty well-versed trainers that they've identified that they send out of state to all these. They're called tactical training officers. And so they would put on trainings for us. They were really engaging.
Yeah, high quality.
Yeah, they had really cool equipment, just for trauma care, like self-treatment of like gunshot wounds and stuff like that. They'd have these little almost like cadaver legs that would shoot blood and things like that. We'd have to you'd actually have to put the tourniquet on and stuff them and things like that. Just a lot of like cool equipment that really made the trainings fun and exciting. As an agency, they would invest in you, though, as you're not a deputy, you're not a federal agent, but they would still invest in you as an officer in your development. And so I got the opportunity. Actually, I don't even think I had flown on a plane since I was like 12 years old, but I got to fly and see both coasts during my time with the task force. So they first sent me to a week-long course, an investigator's course at FLETC, the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center down in Glencoe, Georgia. Yeah. So I went there, and it was a lot more case management, open source investigation, kind of more detective type work and things like that. But it was a really interesting course. I met some interesting people from all over, that had been sent there that I think all had the same sentiment, which I thought was really cool. Of like, the Marshal Service itself really pushes, because of the core mission, a sense of brotherhood. Like they really preach to be a good team member and to have each other's backs. And then the second training I got to go to for a week was called High Risk Fugitive Apprehension. And so they sent us, it was in Los Angeles. I got to stay directly in downtown Los Angeles, directly across the street from the Staples Center. Mm-hmm. So that was cool. We could walk to like local restaurants, movie theaters, things like that. The training facility was just outside of town, but just top of the line equipment. They had it was literally inside like a 2-story building built within this complex. Yeah. They had like 4 different entrances, and they could move walls around. And so we could practice all kinds of
room clearing,
entries, barricades. They had breaching doors, all kinds of cool stuff. You could do vehicle takedowns. We got to shoot a range session, which was in the mountains, this beautiful, gorgeous backdrop. And got some really cool pictures from that. Yeah. So that I mean, that was stuff.
Some neat opportunities.
Yeah,
there.
absolutely. Absolutely. I built some friendships there with guys from other Kansas agencies and stuff that got to go that, I mean, I think I'll talk to these people till the day I die. So it was really fun.
Let me ask about money. So when you're on a task force, who's paying your salary?
Interesting. So your salary is still paid by your home agency.
Okay.
But the federal task force will have a certain amount of money allotted to pay your overtime because it's expected that you're going to work overtime because of this assignment. The formula may be different based off of like what your base salary is. Like, you know, one task force officer may make it different than another.
Right.
But it was basically expected for you to spend it or use it. Like they expected you to stay late. And I'd put in my regular overtime, but then the Marshal Service would pay them. Now,
okay, so you're working overtime, but your department didn't have to pay for that.
Correct.
They got reimbursed.
Reimbursed for it.
Okay.
And it was kind of it was almost like a use it or lose it. Like they expected you to meet that threshold. Otherwise, the allotment would be less the next year. And
Sure.
It always kind of worked out to where, you know, we'd inherently have a case that would take a while or take us outside of town or something like that would eat away that money. Sometimes we had no money to spend. Other times, you know, we're trying to stay late, and we're trying to, you know, beg the marshals to stay with us because they don't have that. They'd call us the TFO mafia and say we were trying to shake them down for funds and things like that. But
how long were you in task forces?
So I served for 8 years. I did 4 years part time and then 4 years full time.
Is that a typical amount of time? Is that longer than usual?
So I think it's dependent on the agency's policy and maybe practices.
Okay.
For us, typically you get a 5-year full-time rotation is kind of the standard.
Okay.
Usually these positions will be announced and you have to apply for them. So you put in like a transfer request, stating your intent to fulfill this position, and then they'll do interviews, and we call a career board, where a panel will go over your merits, and then they make a decision based off that. There are some agencies, if I'm aware of this right, that may bid that task force job based off of just seniority. Okay. And guys may get to stay in that for as long as they have no competition. Nobody else wants to come into it as long as they're being productive. So I think it varies. Some of the state guys from the Department of Corrections are kind of just automatically assigned to the task force. And as long as they're in that position, their ancillary duty is with the task force.
Okay. From a career point of view, let's talk about some of the pros and cons. What you're describing sounds fun. It sounds productive, at least at times. It sounds pretty satisfying. And I can imagine a lot of officers being interested, if not in the task force, or at least interested in that type of work. You know, if they can get that on the local SWAT team or some specialized unit somewhere else, I'm sure they'd be really interested in it. But does it always work out for people on task forces? What are some of the things that they don't tell you when they're recruiting you to a task force?
So I think the biggest con is you have to be available for it. It's 24/7. You know, you could be called out at any time because there's a major incident and people need help. You may have got a tip on a guy. There may have been an escape from a prison. There are the different things that we would work on.
That's hard on family.
That can definitely be hard on family. So the hours can be really, really demanding. It may be just coming in early to set up on a surveillance or an operation. It may be staying late when that wasn't planned. A lot of times we would not have any notice, and we would just decide, hey, we've invested a ton of time into this, just waiting on this person to show themselves, or a car we know is supposed to come or drop somebody off, that we're going to stay here all night, and your family wouldn't have any idea that was going to happen. We'd say, we'd use say in for a penny, in for a pound would be a quote we'd use, or the marshals themselves, their overtime is built into their salary.
Okay.
So they're kind of expected that, hey, overtime's going to come and go, but they're already paid for it. So they refer to that as leap. So we'd always joke with them and tell them, well, hey, guess what, guys? Leap's authorized. You can stay late. You've already got paid for this. That saying Federal Fridays, where they think the feds take Fridays off. Well, we would inherently stir something up late on a Friday. And so we had one guy that was affectionately referred to as Friday Night Mike. And those guys hated him because we'd always stir something late. But
so the schedule could be difficult.
Schedule could be difficult. And like for me personally, I wanted them to feel like I was dependable and that I was a contributor. Like I love being a part of the team, that team environment. So you have to make yourself available to that. That did mean that I'd sacrifice, time with my kids. We'd sit around and joke that, we hadn't seen our kids in a few days. You're gonna miss events. For me personally, having kids, my wife, just at the time, she happened to stay home. If she had been pursuing a career or something else, I don't know how effective we would have been managing that.
Yeah.
So I owe her a ton because, she would be the one that was running them around and gave me that ability to kind of stay and do those things.
Yeah.
We had shifts where it would be 24 hours even, and we've been on this manhunt in the middle of the state and it's, 6 a.m. and I'm trying to drive home. So at the same time, because of the type of offender we're going after, your family's inherently going to worry about you because of that danger.
They're dangerous people.
Not that anytime you put the badge on, they don't wonder and they're not concerned.
But you're specifically going after the most dangerous.
After. I think in 2020 alone, our task force closed something upwards of 50 homicide or attempted homicide cases.
Okay. That's a murderer a week.
Yeah. Where I was, a primary officer either with a ballistic shield or a point guy, calling these people out to us, stopping them in cars, So they knew there was a danger involved. What I would tell my wife was, I would try to reassure her that there was a benefit in that we knew what we were getting into. This wasn't a surprise. This wasn't just a traffic stop that went awry.
You had more control than a lot of other law enforcement scenarios.
Absolutely had more control.
Yeah. We
would be outfitted with the appropriate gear, enough people, things like that. We really tried to use surprise to our advantage. Just what we call like OODA loop and affect that suspect's decision-making process, and we just try to overwhelm them, before they could come up with a plan to run, to fight back, and things like that. And what I always told the guys, especially my 4 years full-time, they had gotten into 4 shootings, I think, when I was part-time. And I was on scene for one of those. But my 4 years full-time, no shootings. And I told them, I said, that was a huge testament to just
the planning.
Our planning, our cohesiveness as a group, our training, our abilities. I think other officers and different mindset, something bad really could have happened. You know what I mean?
One other negative that I'm interested in is being away from your department. You're not in the station or headquarters anywhere else with your own department. So your department's life is going on and people are being hired and retiring and all of this is happening while you're 20 miles away.
Yeah. So I saw it both ways. There were people that you worked with pretty consistently, whether it be detectives, investigation sergeants. I had people put me in for like a merit bonus and things like that because they knew the work we were doing. Kind of your direct supervisors knew, but everyone else just sees you as kind of out of pocket. And almost like you're on vacation or something. I'd stumble
for 8 years.
Yeah, 8 years. I'd stumble across somebody and they say, are you still in the task force in Kansas City, Kansas? And I'm like, yeah, and they're like, oh, well, that's a great place for you. And I'm like, what do you mean by that? You know what I mean? So not everyone saw the benefit of your work or kind of realized what you were doing. Sometimes, unfortunately, they only saw like the worst of the worst because there were certain situations that you had to, report back where maybe somebody got bit by a police dog or we got involved in a shooting or heaven forbid, our vehicles got crashed and I needed it. It's only been 48 hours and I need a new bumper again on my car or things like that. So sometimes people weren't always aware of what you were up to, what you were doing.
They maybe felt that you were absentee.
Yeah.
And that's hardly fair. You're bringing in all these extra resources to help with stuff, but you're not there every day.
Yeah.
And so
there's accountability questions that come up for sure.
Yeah.
And so, like, personally myself, I would, even though it wasn't asked of me, I kept, like, a rolling list of, like, my case assignments and everything I worked on. So
like a log?
Yeah. I'd keep this Google document, spreadsheet where here's all the cases I was personally assigned. Here was all the cases as a task force that we were closing and arrests we were making. And then I'd have another sheet where I just put in, like, maybe daily notes of, like, hey, we did surveillance on X, Y, and Z case. I wrote a warrant for such and such case. I had to research A, B, and C, new case assignments, things like that. Again, it wasn't asked of me, but I just, because of that, because you're away from everything else going on, I didn't want anything to come back on me or people say, hey, you're not, why do you get this? Why do you get a take home car? And why do you get this, all these cool things? What's so special? What is it up to that you're up to? Yeah. And I think I worked like directly related to my city or county, those 4 full-time years, I worked like 242 cases. Yeah. So pretty busy, pretty impactful.
But often happening outside of what all your coworkers are seeing on a daily basis. Yeah. And so that's tough.
It was interesting for me personally because I was on the SWAT team. I was still subject to call out with my home agency 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. I was also on the dive team too, underwater recovery and rescue, so that we would get called out for that. But to maintain those certifications those teams require, we have to do almost weekly training. So we would do like SWAT tactics, a range day, and our specialty day. And so I had to balance. Yeah, I had to balance both. So almost every Wednesday, I'd have to go back to my home agency to train. Of course, I'd get some pushback from the marshals, like the dive training. They refer to me as like my rubber boots training or something, silly. But it was hard if I was in the heat of some investigation in the middle of something to pull away, and vice versa. Like there was guys at work that I'm with now on the SWAT team that I missed when they first came over. I miss building some of those like base personal relationships that I see them having with other people. So you're kind of playing catch up. Yeah.
And now you're back at your police department looking to promote. And so you're going to have a whole, generation of officers that have been at your agency for years now, but they're basically new to you.
Yeah, we have a roll call list, or basically this big photo on the wall of every officer within the agency. Yeah. And it's almost like everyone 10 years or newer, I have no idea who they are. Yeah. Or I've never even met them before. I don't know their names. I don't recognize them. For me, coming back was probably the most difficult adjustment. Okay. It's not something you think about at the time when you're on the task force of like, hey, eventually this is going to come to an end. Is there something I need to do, prepare for this mentally, or to set myself up for that? You may have a nice job you're going back to. You may go back to like investigations or something that aligns with what you're doing anyway. Right. I went back to the SWAT team, which is still exciting. Most people would say, hey, that's a phenomenal
It's a desirable position.
Yeah. But it's still not to talk despairingly about like patrol work, but it seems more mundane. You're not quite as busy.
It's a different tempo.
It's a different tempo. It's because of the magnitude of the cases that we got to be involved with. It's hard to match that feeling of importance, like on your day-to-day level. Sometimes I'd say you feel like maybe your experience isn't being used to its fullest potential. You'll see calls that happen, guys that take off and things like that. You think this is my perfect opportunity to go after this person, but you don't have that authority anymore. You don't have control over that.
It's a big adjustment.
It's like you've lost a little, in a sense, you've lost something. Like some tool out of your toolbox. You're almost being confined or your hands tied a little bit.
Well, let me ask you about the positive then. So let's say a few years down the road, you're a sergeant in patrol, perhaps. Yeah. And you've got these young officers that do not have the kind of experience you have. Yeah. What do you feel like the task force gave you that is going to add to your leadership of those patrol officers?
So I know you and I were talking about how I just put in for promotion, and it's because that sense of fulfillment I've always had with the job. I didn't want that time on the task force to have that sense of like that was the most accomplished I'd ever been in my career. Okay. I know there's still like a ton more I want to do. Yeah. And it may be, like you say, mentoring new officers, teaching them, showing them the right way to do things. Obviously, I've seen cases from end to end. I know what it takes to successfully prosecute one of these serious crimes. to catch this person. So
you've seen the big picture
from
a point of view that they've never seen.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think as far as my personal task force experience, as the case agent, a lot fell on your plate, especially when it came time for to do a takedown. We'd have to do this operational planning. And I think the operational planning probably is the most beneficial towards a supervisory role. Mm-hmm. So there was so many contingencies that we'd have to plan for during a case. It would, are we going to hit this house? Can we make entry into this house? Do we need a warrant? How are we going to do this? We're going to surround a call out. Can we safely clear this? Or do we need other resources here? Is there evidence that we need inside? And maybe it's not even that. Do we wait for them to come out? How do I get everyone on my team in position, staged, if we're going to do a takedown outside?
Yeah.
How do I get units in position to maintain a perimeter?
Yeah, you've got real world experience in the planning side of things that most police sergeants haven't had an opportunity to have.
Just simple things like do we worry about the security of the neighboring houses around us? Just making those quick calls, those quick decisions. Do we let this car go? Do we follow it and take it down somewhere? Is there a safe place to do that? That's extremely difficult to orchestrate. Or do we wait for it to come back?
You've mentioned the OODA loop earlier. Your task force experience is causing you to go through that process and make those decisions quicker at a higher rate than would otherwise be the case.
We could do the sports comparison where they talk about the speed of the game, right? So as athletes move on to the next level of competition, that's always the most difficult thing for them to adjust to, whether it's high school level to college to the pros. It's always things just move too fast, and you gotta account for that. And that only comes from experience, right? You and I played fantasy football together. You want that third-year receiver that's going to break out because he's got some experience under his belt. Those things take time. I do think that things have slowed down for me because of that experience. It's just easier to process in a crisis situation. I know, I see what the ultimate resolution should be. And I know the methods that we need to do to realize that and accomplish it. I kind of pick up on those things quicker. So I think there's a sense of composure and calmness. I don't get as rattled as easy when I'm on scene. I know I've had officers tell me we love having you come to a call because it makes us feel more confident.
Yeah. Because
we know hey, we're gonna make the right decision. We're gonna do it safely. Do it appropriately, and everyone's going to walk away from your suspect and officer in a better situation.
I appreciate Jon coming in to talk about the work that he did in task forces. This topic is obviously meant to help with your career decisions, but being a great cop is more than just the unit that you're in or the assignment that you get. Always pay attention to how you develop your character. Jon and I have been playing pickup basketball together every week for about 10 years. Competition does not always bring out the best in people, but Jon has always proven himself to be good-humored and humble and a fun person to be around. But he's also one of the cops I've heard some of the most flattering things about from other cops. Your fellow officers will respect a cop who's intelligent, helpful, aggressive, street smart, and a hard worker. Do what you can to develop those kinds of traits, and the career opportunities will start to fall your way. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
I had been in there maybe 3 months and went up on a wiretap for a meth dealer out of Escondido, California, bringing in large quantities of meth. And we were able to take him down, and that virtually did away with our meth for a long time.
Oh, wow.
We the next thing that came in was a crack cocaine with the gangs out of Wichita and even Oklahoma City and Kansas City. They found open territory here in Reno County, and I worked cocaine almost specifically for 3.5, 4 years. And took down some major dealers, again, out of Wichita, Kansas City, and Oklahoma City.
You can really help me out by going to Apple Podcasts and giving me a 5-star rating and review. This will help other cops find the show. The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guest and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, pray for peace in our city.